My name is Clara Towson, and I'm a friend of the show.
Boom.
I am Francisca George, and I'm a friend of the show.
Perfect.
Hi, my name is Susan Leemans and I'm a friend of the show.
Boom. Yeah.
My name is Zainab Sammaz and I'm a friend of the show.
Boom.
Hey guys, my name is Sasha Vickery and I'm a friend of the show.
Boom.
Hi, my name is Lloyd Harris and I'm a friend of the show.
Perfect.
Hi, my name is Jasmine Paolini and I'm a friend of the show.
Wow, Jasmine, you got it in one time.
Well, hello there, and welcome to WTA Weekly. It is post US Open wrap up time, and who better to go through it with than a man who's going to make his WTA Weekly debut? It's the one, the only Matt Johns. Matt, how you doing?
I'm good. Thanks for having me on. It's exciting. A big one this week as well, given it's the final Grand Slam just finished of the year.
Yeah. Matt, obviously, in the same sort of category as people like Renee Stubbs, Pam Shriver, and Murta Tunga, who have been up here to wrap up slams.
I'll take it. I'll take it.
This is where we are, the trajectory that Matt is on right now as a tennis commentator.
Yeah, well, what a catalogue of names to be amongst. Yeah, it's good stuff.
Okay. Well, I think we dive right into things because this is what the people want. This is what they're here for. Aryna Sabalenka is the US Open champion, finally. And yeah, I would say this is the first time that we've had an inevitable WTA Slam champion outside of Roland Garros, really, I can't remember the last time a title outside of RG felt inevitably heading towards someone apart from maybe Barty in Australia 22. And given her previous heartbreaks, there was a little bit of doubt around that. But I don't know what your read on that was. Is inevitable a strong word, Matt, for Sabalenka winning the US Open?
I mean, I think you can never be inevitable, but it was as close to inevitable as it can be, really. I mean, she was by far the best player in Cincinnati and really by far the best player at the US Open. I think the only doubts would have been her previous US Open record. I mean, there's been a few near misses in the past, and this time she just had that extra edge and went over the line.
Sorry, I thought you were in the. Sorry, I thought you were going to finish your sentence there. Yeah, it wasn't. Yeah, it seemed like the only set she dropped was to Katerina Alexandrova, and that was Alexandrova playing out of her mind well. Her last three sets of the run were very close. With Navarro, she got a little bit nervous in that semi-final. With Pegula pushing her through the final. So I don't know if she was that far ahead of anyone else, but I don't think the distance matters as long as you get the job done. I mean, look at the difference between Keely Hodgkinson winning the women's 800 at the Olympics or Noah Lyles winning the 100 meters. Still winning.
Yeah, it's small margins, but it doesn't really matter. It's the one who gets the two sets at the end of the match, and I do think she just had that extra edge that maybe she didn't have in previous years, and I think Pegula probably was a nice-ish matchup for her. I think the other semi-finalist opponent potentially could have been more challenging in Muchova, but I think Sabalenka's power. I think when Sabalenka's at her peak, there's very little many players can do to stop it. I mean, maybe Iga at her peak is the only one who can live with that, but obviously she wasn't at the stage to play Sabalenka, so it kind of felt like it was Sabalenka's to lose.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I mean, I think everyone had her as their number one going into the tournament. If anyone knows of someone who didn't put Sabalenka as their title favorite and was serious about it, then I would love to hear from it. I think I have seen people put someone like thinking Mira Andreeva was going to win it, and that's just super optimistic on their part. But yeah, I mean, look, I called the final with Damien. We didn't necessarily get your insight into the final. As you said, Pegula felt like you said Pegula was probably the more favourable match out of the potential semi-finals that she could have got, along with Muchova or Iga. But what was your read on Sabalenka's performance in the championship match? Because obviously she was trying to maybe exercise some demons here.
Yeah, and I think they were still there to an extent. I think the nerves did come into play. I think Pegula also did raise her level in the moment when she was down in both sets, but I think Sabalenka's previous sort of baggage was relevant. But I think the difference was this time she's kind of at another level mentally now to overcome and raise her level when needed, especially in that second set where she lost 5 games in a row. But yeah, I think you could also it's kind of maybe she had an advantage as well because obviously Pegula's first Grand Slam final, so there's some newness about for her opponent, and whereas last year Gauff had already had that Grand Slam final experience. But yeah, it was probably maybe Alexandrova was, you could argue that it was a tougher match, but in terms of throughout the match, I think this was probably her hardest match. And, yeah, she
In
felt
terms of the ones that she actually won in the finals.
yeah, yeah. I mean, no. I think Rybakina, the match with Rybakina at the Australian Open has to the most challenging. The match with Zheng at the Australian Open this year was the most comfortable. This is probably about in the middle. Straight sets, but tight straight sets.
On the Zheng thing, actually, this is a slight tangent, but I did see a take on Twitter, which I think I might have retweeted. But I can't remember who it was from. It might have been Danny, who's an Emma Raducanu fan, and has done stuff with Popcorn. But he said that, I think it was him, but whoever it was said that the Sabalenka Zheng matchup is one of those examples of two players with a similar game, but one does it slightly better than the other, and that just gives them a massive advantage in the matchup. A bit like the Swiatek Gauff matchup, in my eyes.
Yeah, I can see where that's coming from. I mean, I think sometimes you need to have variety against an opponent who can out-hit you, and that's what Sabalenka does to Zheng, or has done so far. I mean, rivalries and head-to-heads can alter throughout time. I mean, you've seen with Medvedev and Sinner, and they're different-ish game styles, but it's gone from Medvedev being completely dominant to Sinner, and so who knows, maybe Zheng can find something to get back at Sabalenka, but at the moment, I think it's going to be a matchup that Zheng is going to want to be avoiding.
Yeah, for me, going back to the final, what I was impressed by with Sabalenka is I can pinpoint tactically how she won it, because we talk about her overwhelming her opponents with her big hitting, although I will say that she also demonstrated amazing touch and with the racket that is available to her if she needs it, with her drop shots, and that was one of the things she used to exploit Pegula, because I don't think it was necessarily her out hitting Pegula, because Pegula could rally with Sabalenka for a lot of that final. It was actually she won because she figured out what Pegula's weaknesses were and exploited them. The two weaknesses being Pegula's forward movement to catch drop shots, and Pegula's second serve was Sabalenka was eating it for breakfast, really.
Yeah, and I think obviously Sabalenka is so powerful. I mean, her shots are so powerful, but it's not like that's her only strength. There's a lot more to Sabalenka's game than just the power, and I do think the net skills and the touch has been a big improvement over the last year, and maybe not necessarily an improvement, but something she's implemented more in recent times, because obviously she's a doubles Grand Slam champion as well, and it's not like she's a one-trick pony, and Pegula is a lot more powerful than maybe people could give her credit for. So against an opponent like that, you have got to use all your tricks.
Yeah, she really does. So and we talk about all of her improvements, and she is now, because of those improvements, a 3-time Grand Slam champion in singles. Obviously, another 2 in doubles. Does she? Has she now attained the status of all-time great, or at least maybe if you thought she was already there and needed the numbers to just cement it?
Yeah, I think she could definitely be in the category of like the Hall of Famers maybe one year. I don't know how many years' time it will be, but I kind of think from my perspective it's more 3 and counting. I can't see this being 3 and done. Maybe I'm wrong, and you never know with fitness and who else, whatever could happen. But on hard courts, Grand Slams, she's probably the best player right now on hard courts at Grand Slams, and even Wimbledon, you've got to think could be an aim for her in the future. I think Roland Garros, she's definitely a good player on clay, but Iga Swiatek is by far the leader, so that might be the most challenging one if she does have the aim of getting the career slam at some point.
Yeah, for me, Wimbledon is the next prize that she's going to be gunning for, because that's where some of the more Scottish is a tournament that she'd be one of the heavy favourites for.
Yeah.
A bit like with the US Open, 2021, she narrowly lost the semi-final. 2022, she wasn't allowed to play. 2023, she makes the semi-finals and narrowly loses again. 2024, she couldn't play this time because of injury. And actually, that last 2024, she was probably watching that Wimbledon going, I could have won that one, given how the draw worked out.
Yeah.
So, yeah, no question. I think Wimbledon is going to be the one that she's going to be going for in 2025 as the priority.
Yeah, I mean, it's no disrespect to Vondrousova and Krejcikova, but Sabalenka will be thinking there's absolutely no reason why she can't be the next to Wimbledon. I think it's the slam where it's the most open, because a lot of players are not necessarily, their games aren't suited to grass, and the players that are more suited to grass maybe don't have the general level that Sabalenka does. So it's definitely got to be a big aim for her in 2025.
Yeah. It's interesting. When I was doing prep for the show and looking at sort of things we could talk about with Sabalenka, it's kind of interesting because like it's hard to come up with questions because she's just that good. She was just that good. Like there wasn't a lot to analyze. She was just better than everyone. Talked about her performance in the final for one thing, but she just blasted all her other opponents off the court over the course of the draw. But I was thinking, like, why do I maybe have more questions about Swiatek? Might be to do with bias, but it also might be to do with the fact that we're looking to Iga as being the next sort of all-time leader. I mean, she's still got more slams than any other active player apart from Venus Williams. She's been world number 1 for so long. She's leading the pack. Sabalenka's kind of almost the person chasing, even though she's older, and also maybe that age thing. She's been around for longer, and she's having to change some minds about her over the last couple of years. Because I know I had doubts about her winning slams before 2023 due to how erratic she was at that point. But also being older, she's got less time than Iga does, and so maybe the hype's a bit less. But I don't know, sort of, where do we kind of sort of assess Sabalenka in kind of the tennis landscape right now? Because there's no doubt that she is kind of Iga's biggest rival. But what are we talking about for her next steps other than targeting Wimbledon? How ambitious are we as fans for her?
Yeah, I mean, I think a big goal of hers has to be the number 1 spot. I mean, she's been there before, but I think she wasn't there for a considerable period. I think it was 8 weeks. I can't remember the exact amount of time.
Yeah, we looked it up on Saturday.
Yeah, and I think the gap is still pretty considerable at the moment. I mean, Iga is by far the best player on the tour and still has a pretty good Grand Slam record, besides what people might want to say. But I think Sabalenka's got to be targeting the number one spot and just continuing her dominance at Grand Slams. I mean, yeah, she hasn't won every single one, but she's pretty much always reaching the semi-finals. And the only thing I would say is that the Cincinnati was her first title since the Australian Open, so maybe just collecting more titles, because she always is there and thereabouts at the latter stages, but doesn't necessarily go all the way. So this was pretty impressive for her to go back to back and take both the Cincinnati and US Open title when the titles haven't necessarily been collecting this year.
Yeah, the Asian swing is going to be very critical for her. And actually, you're saying that obviously the gap to Swiatek's pretty big. That's being padded out by the fact that Swiatek has 1,000 points from Beijing and 2,500 and another 1,500 from winning the WTA Finals. If you look at the WTA race, they're within about 1,000 of each other, which is where we're going to be focusing on a little bit more now, because a little bit for the WTA Finals, but also, the points that Iga had from last year are going to drop. She's defending way more. And I think the question then has to be, how do you see the battle for number one progressing over the next couple of months as we head into the WTA Finals? Is Iga going to hold on to it? Or actually, is Sabalenka going to reverse what happened last year, where it looked like 2023 was going to be the year of Saba, and then Iga steals it right at the end? And actually, 2024 was looking set to be the year of Iga. Maybe Saba steals it in the end.
Yeah, I mean, I think I've just looked at the race now, and it's about 400 points, so it's not a lot at all. I think obviously Sabalenka's been pretty successful in Wuhan, which I believe is returning this year, so maybe that would be a good target for her. But it's interesting. Obviously, the WTA Finals this year are in Jeddah. Is it Jeddah or Riyadh? I forget. Riyadh, right? So there's kind of nothing to go off in terms of that location. It's kind of a complete new outlook on what that could be. So yeah, it's interesting. Obviously, Iga's had success last year on the Asian swing. Sabalenka's had previous on the Asian swing. I think it's probably more who's fresh going into it and who can collect the point Sabalenka's chasing. So is that a better position to be in chasing, or is it a better position to be in being the chased? I don't know. It's the tricky one.
I think it's going to depend on what we get into when we get to Riyadh. I think that's going to be what makes the difference. Ashley saying, of course, whoever wins the finals is going to get the number one. Ashley in the live chat, which I agree with, because I think it's going to be that close when we get to Riyadh, unless Sabalenka crashes out early in Beijing and Wuhan and Iga mops up, then she kind of puts it beyond doubt. So there's that to look at. We've still got an Asian swing to go when we get to Riyadh. And also it's going to depend on the court speed, because obviously if you've got the Middle East double that happens early in the year in Doha and Dubai, they're both very different courts, because Doha is very gritty and slow for a hard court, which is why Iga always wins. And Doha is very slick and fast, which interestingly Iga still does well at, a bit like with Cincinnati. She still makes the semis, but she's a little bit more vulnerable. And it's the kind of court that you would expect Arena to do better on. So I think it's all going to come down to whether the Riyadh courts are more like Doha or Dubai, because whichever one it is, that's going to favor one of these two. Yeah,
definitely. I mean, I think both players will do well. I think Sabalenka could do well on slow hard courts, and Iga could do better on fast hard courts. But when they're that good and that close, those margins on the court speed and all the balls, exactly everything, is just going to have such a big impact when there's so little margin between the two players. But it's just going to be great to see them both peaking and hopefully really battling out for that number one spot right till the end of the year, like they did last year, really.
Well, we're getting people in the live chat asking us for the live rankings. I want to talk about them when we get towards the end of the show and sort of we set up for the end of the year, and we'll look at them in detail then, if you want to stick around for that. I don't know them off the top of my head in exact order, but It's worth having a look to see the live race anyway for now, but we'll probably break it down in detail then. But but yeah, there's a lot of interesting questions coming in, by the way, there, and I think there's some things we can look at them on time. But yeah, for me, this is setting up a fascinating race between these two for the rest of the year. Yeah, I was really hoping they'd play each other this US Open final. I definitely hope we get a Grand Slam final between them at some point. But I guess it depends on. But yeah, I would love to see a rematch for them, ideally in Riyadh.
Yeah, I mean, I think that they've had so many good finals and just general matches at tour events, it'd be a bit of a crying shame if they weren't to reach and play each other in a Grand Slam final, where they do tend to bring the best out of each other on these big stages. And I don't know which Grand Slam I would prefer to see them play in a final. I think probably one of the hardcore ones, but I'm not really sure.
That's a good question.
I suppose in some ways it would be interesting if it was Wimbledon, because if it was a Wimbledon final, then it means that Iga's obviously figured out the grass more than she has ever before. But whether that will ever happen, I think that'd probably be the most unlikely of the 4 Grand Slams.
I think of the 4 slams, the one I think they have the most chance of playing us the closest match possible would be the US Open.
Yeah.
I would say. And like they played a good match there in 2022. It was really close. Iga won in 3. Medium, fast, hard court should favour Sabalenka. If Iga's feeling all right, I don't think it's too much of a problem with her speed rise. It's only super fast she really struggles with, which is basically like Cincinnati, more vulnerable at, but still get semi-final. Same with Dubai, which she's nearly won in the past. She only lost to Krejcika because she was sick in 23. I think Wimbledon and grass in general is where the big question marks kind of come. But I don't think there's many courts out there that play at a speed enough that causes Iga super problems, apart from Cincinnati and Australian Open, actually. Australian Open.
Yeah, because really her best result, the Australian Open, came kind of before this Iga Swiatek, kind of the one Iga Swiatek came to light. She reached semi-finals 2 years ago and has since not equaled that. So it's definitely not been one of her strongest tournaments in this last couple of years.
No, definitely not. I think normally I kind of go through semi-finalists, but I think so we have kind of a nice flow going on here, and I think it makes logical sense to kind of not come back too much to a player, but sort of stop a conversation and pick it up after we talked about other things in between. Mm-hmm. Let's talk about Iga Swiatek's US Open now. I think now's a good time to do that, maybe, and then we'll pick back up on Pegula and the other semi-finalists.
Yeah.
And we're talking about Iga's potential. I think my assessment of this US Open for her was she looked amazing at 3 out of the 5 matches she played. Some of her best wins of the season were played today at this US Open, but much of that will be forgotten because she lost in the quarterfinals.
Yeah, I mean, I watched quite a lot of the Pavlyuchenkova match, and she was really, really good. Really pushed through the difficult moments, and probably looked as good as she did in the whole tournament. I didn't watch the Shibahara match, but obviously she completely did what Iga does sometimes and lost 1 game, I believe. But yeah, it's interesting how it can change so quickly throughout a tournament, and the amount of errors against Pegula cost her, definitely.
Yeah, a little bit like with the Xiong match at the Olympics.
Yeah, it's obviously you're never going to have 7 perfect matches in a Grand Slam. It's not feasible. But I think you've got to have a bit more of a level playing field, and rather than playing really, really great matches, and then a bit of a not so good match against Pegula.
I think with that loss, yeah, she wasn't great against Pegula, but I never like talking about matches in terms of the person who lost, even if I have strong opinions about certain players. With that one, we kind of have to recognize that Pegula also played really, really well. And she was playing really well going into it. She continued to play well after the match. Because, yeah, like a lot of she was redirecting well. She was staying with Swiatek. Like, if you look at the Rakhimova match, Swiatek was also pretty shocking in that, but Rakhimova did not capitalize. Rakhimova wasn't playing well enough to capitalize. Similar situation with other matches that Iga's not played well at and still won. I think for me, it's still, this loss doesn't tell us anything massively new in that Iga only loses when, one, she's not her best, and two, her opponent plays great. The only exceptions I can think of are Ostrava in 22 against Krejcikova and Madrid 23 against Sabalenka.
Yeah, I don't think it's a massive cause of concern, because you can watch that match and she can watch that match back and be like, that's why I lost. It wasn't like I was at my best and it still wasn't enough. She knows that to win these matches, she's just got to cut down the errors, maybe bring in the margin slightly, and play basically better. I mean, her serve has been effective in a lot of these recent matches. Obviously, she's changed it up this year, and in that match it wasn't. It's just some days you're not gonna have your best day, and if it's at the Grand Slams and you're the number one, it's gonna create more headlines. But I think you'd rather be in a position where you know why you've lost, rather than being like, I don't know, and I don't know what to do about it. She knows what needs to be changed in the future, and basically she's proved that she can adapt before, and I'm sure she will again.
Yeah, I think her best performances have come after she's had a pretty tough loss. If you look at US Open last year, or you look at maybe before that with sort of late 21 was tough for her as well, and then 22 kicked off amazingly. And I guess for her, it's like the question is it that Iga needs to have fewer off days or handle the situation better when she is having an off day?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think the thing is that I don't think that when you're number one, you don't have that many off days. I think maybe I think the thing I've noticed more recently, I think it was probably more prevalent at the Olympics because it was the Olympics, and I think everyone knows how much that sort of meant to Iga. But I think sometimes the pressure of situations, she spoke about that before, it can really overcome her. I'm not necessarily sure that was the case at this year's US Open. I think it might have been at last year's US Open that she spoke about after losing to Yelena Ostapenko. But this year, I think, to be honest, I think she just came against a really informed player and didn't have the time or the plan B to really to come back against Pegula. I mean, she was 4-love down in that first set, and I think she realised that she was in trouble. And although there was a bit of a rallying effort in the second set, it just wasn't enough. And maybe that's a case of best of three matches. You just it can go so quickly without you having the time to react. But I think maybe just having, sometimes it feels that maybe Iga needs to have sort of a level that's a bit closer to her top level, because sometimes it feels like it's kind of there or it's there, and maybe it needs to be a bit more there and then there. Just the gap needs to close. I think that's how I read it.
I could see that sort of when she's not at her top level. Yeah, there's a step in between that might need to exist. I don't know, but I feel like it comes out sometimes. I think it is there. And I guess sort of in some of the points that you've raised about how she's handling things, is that a problem unique to Iga? Because I would say no, because we've said the same thing about Sabalenka before as well.
Yeah, I think it's just one of those things that when you're that caliber of player, it's just so much more noticeable. And maybe that's why we talk about it more, because it is Iga Swiatek, #1, 5-time Grand Slam champion, and we notice it more because basically these off days come a lot less frequently, and that's why they're the anomaly in the situation. And it's kind of just it's almost like a product of your own downfall, because you're that good that the off days do cause such a reaction.
They do. And I find it interesting that, again, when we as tennis fans are like putting Sabalenka in the same category, the conversation isn't the same. Is it because she's not the world #1?
Yeah, but possibly. I mean, I think they are viewed slightly differently. I don't know why that is, but I think I think the number next to her name, #1, Sabalenka, obviously has dropped down to #3 recently, but it's back at #2. But again, still has kind of felt like the #2 this year. But yeah, I think the one has to be the reason, because there's not really anything else that's separating them, really.
Yeah. Other than they play the game. I mean, I got into a discussion with a Twitter user about this because he's someone who's been watching tennis since the Navratilova days, and he was saying, no, we've never like that. In his mind, that's a true contrast of styles, whereas he sees Iga and Arena as baseliners, and just standard baseliners. But I think they're very different in the way they approach it, because Sabalenka is kind of almost overwhelming with speed and of the speed of ball, whereas Iga's ball is spinnier, more awkward, and can land deeper because of it. They're both very intense and both very high risk players, but I think the way they execute is quite different.
Yeah, I mean, just to go on the high risk point, I think that is probably why Iga can have these off days, because when you've got high risk, it has a lot of high reward when you're someone of Iga's talent, but there are going to be days where it doesn't come off, and that's obviously why you get to players like Pegula, it's not going to work. But yeah, I think they are very different. I never watch them and think, oh, they're similar, but I think their styles, thankfully, when they do play it, #1, #2, it really does work against each other, and it's created some fantastic matches. I mean, the Madrid final this year was possibly, if not the match of the year, and that's
Someone
why
else who thinks that.
yeah, I think that's why we're really longing for Grand Slam finals, because it would be fantastic, I'm sure.
Yeah, even their straight sets matches have been really good to watch.
Yeah,
I can't think of a dud, a complete dud Iga Sabalenka match. Even the Cincinnati one, which seemed one-sided for a set and a bit, the end of it was incredible.
Yeah, and I think it's like there's no, as far as I'm aware, there's no like issues with each other, but there's definitely that that there's a lot of respect, but there's also that like hint of rivalry, and I think that's what makes it such a good match, because you know how much they want to beat each other. You know that they see each other as their closest rival, regardless of what the rankings are at the time. And I think there's a lot of respect, but also a lot of motivation to beat one another, and that's what creates the great matches.
Yeah, I would agree, and it's really nice to see that kind of respect happening, and I'm interested to see sort of what happens next and the legacy these two players build, because like against each other but also independently, because this is something I was thinking about towards the end of it, and like when we've been talking about why we analyze losses in the way that we do for Swiatek and to a certain extent Sabalenka, but I do think Swiatek more because of the #1. I think you have hit the nail on the head there. And I think a lot of it, we go into this because we're excited for players to build some kind of legacy that we can rave about, in the same way as when we look back at Serena or Steffi and Christian Martino on the women's side, the big three on the men's side. And I wonder whether sort of when we kind of talk about players and go, well, is there a way to improve? Is this good enough? It's because we're excited by the idea of seeing legendary legacies and feel let down by that.
Yeah, I know what you're saying. I mean, we've kind of had a period of not random, but like, well, a bit random, like one-time Grand Slam champions, and we've kind of had that. And now I feel like we're wanting this to be the next big thing in the rivalry. I mean, you can always look back at the old rivalries and Navratilova Everett, like you mentioned, the Williams sisters, and it's nice to feel like you're kind of living through the next big rivalry that one day people will say, like Sabalenka Swiatek, and I think it would be amazing if that does really come to, because obviously people watch the tour and that's great if you see those matches, but the Grand Slams are what people will really remember, and I think it would be fantastic if we can get that and get the rivalry that we deserve. I think as fans we would love to see, and they deserve to have that moment together as well.
Yeah, I agree. I'd like multiple moments, to be honest, to see that. But like for the sake of good tennis in the moment, and we can talk about it afterwards for sure.
Yeah.
But yeah, I do think that's where a lot of the kind of the analysis comes from when we kind of really dig into it. Is we want people to kind of be superhuman almost, and as maybe that's not the right perspective or a perspective you'd be comfortable with, but I am content with the prospect that maybe that maybe someone's not necessarily someone on the tour now isn't going to reach Serena's heights, but maybe they will because they have long careers ahead of them.
Yeah, I think it's really hard to like, you see 23. I mean, it's such a massive figure, and you can say, oh, Iga could win this many, but there's so many little variables and factors that could impact that. I mean, the trajectory that Iga's on, who knows? It's definitely not out of the question, but I do think that even though I think Sabalenka is Iga's biggest challenger and really can challenge her at the biggest events, I do think Iga's dominance at one slam and obviously just won another slam and really has the potential to win all four. I think Iga is the one who really could challenge the biggest numbers. But again, you just don't know because of injuries and all the different factors.
What makes you think Iga's more likely to do that than Sabalenka? Is it the age thing?
Yeah, I think it definitely comes into it, and I don't know why, because on the surface of it, Sabalenka's probably the more all-court player. But I think it's kind of that thing of Swiatek. I'm sure she will lose at Roland Garros one time, but it just feels like Roland Garros is almost just there every year for her, and then there's the other three that she can contend for. Whereas Sabalenka, as much as she's obviously won the Australian Open the last 2 years, the US Open this year, it does feel like there's going to be people who will come on the hard courts. Wimbledon, we've said that could be a thing, but again, you've got Rybakina, who could be around, and potential other names depending on health and what have you. But yeah, I just feel like Iga, with perhaps the age and also just the dominance on clay, I think I could see her with the higher number at the end of their careers.
I mean, that would probably be the case. I think I would agree with that assessment. I think Arena's going to hopefully be healthy for, I mean, how old is she now? 26. So you're getting her another 5-6 years out of her ish if she stays healthy, shoulder doesn't become an issue, to pick up a Wimbledon, some more hard court titles. She could lock down the Australian Open at this rate. You never know.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen what Djokovic has done in that tournament. Whether I think it's probably a bit of an ask for her to get anywhere near that, but it's definitely become her favourite Grand Slam of the four. And when someone starts that strong at the start of every year, it'll be interesting to see whether that can continue throughout a year. I think Roland Garros is the one where, like I've said before, will be the biggest challenge, and it might become a thing. If she wins Wimbledon, then it'll be like, right, I've got one more to win, and maybe she'll put a lot of priority into Roland Garros. But Iga will be a big obstacle if she wants to get that title.
Definitely will be, and for anyone to get that title. Yeah, there we go. That's where we're at. At the minute, we're still feeling like we're living in the era of Iga Arena right now. But there were challenges to that status, this US Open, not the biggest of which was Jessica Pegula, who is the finalist. I know there were a lot of people in the live chat for the live version of this broadcast asking us already to jump straight into talk about Pegula. And interestingly, Pegula was the person that ended up tweeting them out the most during the US Open, other than Swiatek, because she was impressing me that much. She beat Swiatek. I'm going to say she pushed Sabalenka, actually, in that final. I don't think many people would disagree with me on that. But feel free to, Matt. Is this the best we've ever seen her play?
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, even just the fact of overcoming the quarterfinal hurdle. I mean, I forget how many because I always get confused between her and Rublev's numbers, but I think hers are slightly less than. It was,
I think it's
five or six. Yeah.
6.
And to do that against the number one is a big indicator of how good you are playing and how confident you're feeling. And I think she actually spoke about how much that wasn't really a thing for her. So that is good that she doesn't have that in her head, or at least says she doesn't have it in her head. And to not only win the quarterfinal, to go through the semi-final and really, I say, push the eventual champion. It really good does go to show that how good a form she is. And obviously she came in as one of the form players, having won Toronto and then reached the final in Cincinnati. So yeah, it's been a really good hardcore summer for Jessica Pegula.
Yeah. Really good. Second best player of the North American hardcourt season.
Yeah.
No doubt about that. No doubt about that whatsoever. I guess, does the fact that she's now reached a Grand Slam final, broken that quarterfinal duck, as you say, and actually maybe played better in the final than a lot of people expected, because there were some questions about how she would handle it. Does that change our perception of Pegula? Should it?
Yes and no. I think the quarterfinal thing was a thing, so she's kind of brushed out of the window. Whether it comes back in 2025, who knows? Then it might become a thing again. But if she's then kind of reaching the semis on a regular basis, potentially more finals, then I think that will become irrelevant. But yeah, I think her level is so, like we said about Iga, it can be a bit fluctuating, and Pegula is generally pretty solid and will catch a lot of players out when they're not necessarily on their highest level. And I think sometimes it's easy to downplay Pegula and kind of say she's just a consistent player and what have you. But actually, she is a really good tennis player. She has a lot more power than people give her credit for. And I think really in this North American hardcourt swing, she's shown that she's not just a sort of high seed. She's actually a challenger for slams. And maybe, I don't know if Wimbledon will ever be one for her, or Roland Garros, but I think the hardcourt slams, definitely she's got to be a contender for the titles.
I think Wimbledon's a possibility. I saw, obviously she won Berlin. I did watch Pegula when I went to Wimbledon this year, and I was very impressed seeing her up close and live and how she played. I thought, okay, something's going on here. And then she just played a bad round two. Well, bad for her anyway. I think, and don't forget how close she was to make the semis. And if she'd made the semis instead of Vondrousova, arguably would have been on for winning the title, given Svitolina was a little bit gassed and Jabeur was nervous. So that could have been, or it could have been like that Madrid 2022 final between her and Jabeur, which was just a nerve fest. But that's all very much ifs and buts. I can see a scenario happening where she is a big title contender. It's less likely if she has to get through Swiatek or Sabalenka, but she has done it before. I think, obviously winning Montreal by beating Swiatek, WTA Finals, the only player that she couldn't beat was Swiatek last year, but she beat Sabalenka and Rybakina and Gauff in that tournament, lest we forget. Maybe her challenge is more beating Swiatek and Sabalenka in the same tournament. If one or both aren't there, then we have to say that she'd be in the mix and one of the favourites to mop up.
Yeah, I think I'd agree. I mean, other than Sabalenka and Swiatek, I think there's not really many players that would be more of a certain bet to challenge
I
at
can hear Elena Rybakina if he was screaming at the screen right now.
Yeah, I think Rybakina is so hard to predict Rybakina at the moment, and it's quite tricky to watch. It's quite hard to watch Rybakina at the moment, but yeah, Rybakina playing at her best, sure, definitely. But I think the difference between the two is that Pegula is such kind of a safe bet to do. Generally speaking, do all right at Grand Slam, whereas Rybakina you just don't know at the moment. So that's kind of my thinking. And Australia could potentially maybe be. Obviously, Swiatek hasn't necessarily done so well at Australian Open in the last few years. So if Pegula was in Swiatek's half, you never know.
Yeah, you never know. Yeah, you never know with it. I mean, like she does. I think when the court's faster, she has more of a chance.
Yeah.
So, and then Sabalenka as well. You know, the court's a bit slower. She's got a chance.
Yeah.
But yeah, massive fight from Pegula. Best I've ever like. It's the best I've ever seen her executing her game, and I think she should be super proud with how this UC Open went, and hopefully it kicks her on at this phase of her career. Obviously, she's 30 now. She's probably got a couple more years, top level left in her. You never know, but that would be what I would expect. The player she beat in the semi-final, she had to come from a set down against Karolina Muchova, who, let's be honest, was one of the big stories of this US Open, because whenever she won a match, everyone was talking about it. And it's interesting that the US Open seems to now be her consistent slam, given she's reached semi-finals back-to-back years, somehow saved her ranking, and now only way is up if she's healthy. Yeah, thoughts on Muchova's run?
Yeah, I mean, I'll be honest. Leading into the tournament, she wasn't even a factor in my mind. I know how good she can be, but like, I just didn't really even think about her as a contender. And as the tournament went on, like, I was watching her matches and thinking, wow, like the fact that she's staying fit, which is the most important thing after such a big injury, and the way she's playing against, like, it was not a nice draw for a lot of the way. She beat some big names in Osaka, Potapova, Paolini. I mean, brushed aside Paolini, really, who's been amazing at Grand Slams, and then Haddad Maia, who was kind of a surprising quarterfinalist given her form this year. But yeah, the talent in Muchova is always kind of been known in the last few years, but to actually stay fit, and I think if she stays fit, then she has to be a challenger at most Grand Slams, because her level is so high, and she really looks like she's going to be in another Grand Slam final. But Pegula fought back like she showed throughout the tournament.
Yeah, I think that was a Pegula fight back in that match more than a Muchova meltdown, because she played so well. Like she beat Osaka in a pretty good quality match. As you said, the net players you named there, Paolini, who's one of the form players of the year. Like, yeah, Muchova at her best is wonderful to watch, and we've seen before is able to beat all the top players. And it would have been an absolutely fascinating clash if she played Sabalenka. I think the only problems Muchova faces are her fitness, and I would say her level does fluctuate in matches, a bit like a less extreme example with less extreme version of Bianca Andreescu, maybe. Like, can fluctuate, can get into a scrap, drop a set, suddenly things become a bit harder when she's maybe not on top form. The reason why it's less extreme is first of all, the ups and downs are not as extreme, and secondly, she plays top level more often at the minute. But in my mind, she's someone I can see winning a Grand Slam one day. To be honest, I think given how close she got before, it would be kind of crushing if she never did.
Yeah, I think it's just one of those that she's got so much potential, and not even just potential. It's kind of past that now, where it's been showcased at the biggest tournaments, so in Roland Garros final, 2 US Open semi-finals, Cincinnati final. Yeah, it's just about staying fit and kind of having those consistent runs and putting yourself in those positions. I mean, I think, like you said, she's got I don't think she's got any ranking points to defend for the rest of this year. So it's all about building that ranking back up, getting to a seeded spot. And yeah, I mean, it would have been interesting to see that Sabalenka final, given their head-to-head. I think Muchova's won the last 2 meetings, and yeah, it would have been interesting if that had an impact.
Yeah, and to your point, I think she's only defending like 10 points between now and Eastbourne.
There you go. Then see, it's the only way is up for her.
Yeah, because everyone else is going to be moving around like crazy. Like, even if she loses first round in every tournament she plays,
She'll still be making little incremental movements.
Also, don't want to move on from Muchova too quick before mentioning, I think she ended up hitting the shot of the tournament, right?
Yeah, I mean, I just can't see anyone arguing that there was a better shot. I mean, there were some great shots in the tournament, both men's and women's side, but that shot is just like, that doesn't happen hardly ever, and for her to pull that off and still, yeah, it's one of the things that Muchova has that hardly any other player can do. It's just the natural skill is unbelievable.
The only other player I've seen hit anything close to that is Alcaraz. And for anyone who's not familiar with what we're talking about, Pegula hit a behind the back winner. Was it a winner or set her up for the point anyway, during her first round match? And I'm sure there's a highlight out there somewhere you can go and check out, because it was wonderful to watch if you're a tennis fan.
Stuff.
Same with Pegula's tennis in general. Also, again, reminder, Miles David called her eyebrows the best in tennis. If you want to go back and watch that Palermo episode. There you go. There's a still of the shot. Also, okay, Ozan, I'm seeing your comment, and the US Open are wrong. The Navarro is the 4th semi-finalist, and again keeps making these incremental steps that are helping her step forward and establish herself as a top player in the game. She beat Coco Gauff again. She got into another Grand Slam quarterfinal, and this time played way better in that quarterfinal than she did at Wimbledon, and did not go down easily in the semi-final against Sabalenka. Now in the top 10, and probably, and yeah, I would say sort of thoughts on this US Open in terms of building her career and her trajectory.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people who necessarily don't follow the tour and the lower tour kind of thought at the start of this year, who is Emma Navarro? Why is she seeded? Like, why is her ranking so high? And I think people are starting to get it now. I mean, I think 4th round at Roland Garros, quarterfinals at Wimbledon, and now semis at the US Open. It's like, that doesn't happen to just any old player. Like, that is a good player. I think the thing that stands out about Emma Navarro is that there seems to be not many, if any, weaknesses. It's a very just sort of all-round game. It's very, very, very strong. And I think now her ranking is in the top 10. It's going to be even trickier to stop her going deep in these tournaments.
Yeah, game-wise, I might be way off, so feel free to kind of come back at me and say you don't see it, but reminds me a little bit of Gauff, not in technique, but they're both very fast, very solid players, very defense orientated in some ways. I think Emma's got the stronger forehand in terms of it doesn't break down as much, but it does still generate quite a bit of spin. And you're right, it is a very solid all-around game. Maybe she's somewhere between Gauff and Pegula in that sense.
Yeah.
Like, you know, the kind of the mix of the two. But she's pretty good. I think the only times I've seen things go wrong for her is when she's not handled a match well, which again can be Gauff's weakness, or even Pegula's from time to time, or she gets overwhelmed, which is happening less and less often.
Yeah, which is it's scary. I mean, a lot of the overwhelmingness and things could be because this is still reasonably new to her in terms of the biggest stages, and now it's becoming more and more frequent. The nerves will probably be less and less every time she comes around to these stages, and I just think the Australian Open, where she definitely could be a top 10 player and a top 10 seed, possibly top 8 as well, it could be scary for the rest of the draw.
I mean, we'll go back to this in a minute, but she's actually on track for the last spot in the WTA Finals at the minute, which, I mean, I guess one of the things I wrote down as a note, because for this show, was Emma Navarro is a top 10 player. How does that sound to you? And I think from what you're saying, that sounds about right. But I guess maybe some people in the chat for the live version of this might disagree.
Yeah, I think it still feels a bit weird, like, because I don't know why it does, but it does. But at the same time, there's no arguing that her achievements this year have backed that up. I mean, maybe in terms of titles, there's still more to go, but I think it's kind of when rather than if for her. Still, I think only 23. So yeah, there's a lot of good things for Emma Navarro. I think, like, if a lot of people have said this that I've seen, if it wasn't for Jasmine Paolini this year, then maybe Emma Navarro would be getting more attention.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, she definitely would be, I think, in that situation, because it's been a season. But Paolini reaching 2 Grand Slam finals is going to eclipse so many other people. Yeah, it's an interesting scenario, and like I think also Navarro is now probably college tennis's best hope of seeing a big success, like an even bigger success. Now Danielle Collins is retiring. Obviously, Collins winning 1,000 with a college background is huge for him. I guess it's kind of Navarro's kind of the next best hope to keep that trajectory kind of going with either more 1,000s or even a bigger result by reaching Grand Slam final. I
definitely. I don't think it's out of the question that Navarro does win the 1,000 event next year.
Big bold claim, not out of the question. That's
it's vague. It's vague.
There we go. Before we move on from Navarro, there is I don't want to dwell on this too long because I prefer to keep it to on-court stuff. But obviously much was made of her and Pegula doing really well and their backgrounds, and they are talking that there's definitely some back and forth in the chat on this topic already. Does the US women's tennis have a privilege problem?
Yes and no, but I think tennis, I mean, I don't know about every country, but I feel like in the UK, tennis is a very like privileged sport, upper class sport, and maybe a lot of people think there are barriers to get into the sport because of it's an expensive sport. There's no denying that. I mean, it takes a lot of money and time and effort to get to the top, but I mean, you can obviously argue that it's undeniable that both Navarro and Pegula have advantages in terms of their wealth and their family's wealth, but at the same time, wealth doesn't get you to top 10 in the world. Like, it can help, but there's way more to that than just having money, and they've obviously put the time and the effort in. And I think, as far as I'm aware, they don't seem to make a big deal out of that. But yeah, it's interesting to see the different point of views on it. But in my opinion, I kind of think money is definitely a help, but you've kind of got to put the work in to get to the very top.
I agree with you. Money could keep you on the ITF tour
Yes.
or even the Challenger tour on the ATP side. You would, if you don't put the work in and you don't look to work to improve, then you're not gonna get very far. You'll crash out first round even in those events. It'll just be kind of an expensive vanity project to keep going. Even if you could, in theory, have the money to hire the best coaches in the world, the best coaches are not interested in just working for the money. They only want to work with special talents.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do agree with you that a lot of tennis in general, there are, if you look at the people's backgrounds, they are well funded. I think British tennis, if you look at that, most of the names involved are people who were well connected to the tennis high ups in the LTA, apart from a few people who went and got support from abroad and then came back, like Andy Murray, Cam Norrie, or Joe Conter even. But the women's side, I think you get a little bit more variance, possibly because of the college system. It's an interesting situation that, like, it's there. I don't think it gives you an advantage, and I don't think it's impossible for people from different backgrounds to break through in this sport compared to others. I mean, the most extreme example, Matt, do you follow Formula One at all?
I mean, I wouldn't say I follow it like closely, but I kind of know generally what goes on. I sort of follow it from a distance, is how I describe it.
Have you heard of Lance Stroll?
Yes.
Yeah. So Lance Stroll, for those who are in the F1 community, his dad owns Aston Martin, like the entire car brand, who have a team in F1, and he drives for Aston Martin. And the common consensus is that whilst he is not a terrible driver and could conceivably is probably up there and could got his seat in F1 on genuine pace. He's a Formula 3 champion, a bit like winning a few challenger titles or ITFs. There was a consent that the view is he's probably not in the top 20 best in the world, but he's got a job because his dad owns the team. You don't get a situation like that in tennis, really. So I think for me, it kind of, like you said, it kind of balances out. You have to put the work in, and people like Pegula and Navarro put the work in.
Definitely.
All right, moving on to another American player who definitely put the work in, but it's not necessarily paying off right now. Coco Gauff. We're going to do our top 4 check-in now. We've done 2 of them, Swiatek and Sabalenka. Next is Coco Gauff. And we had another mid-tournament capitulation. And I don't know about you, Matt, but it does look like Coco's lost some of her mojo, some of her confidence.
Yeah, I mean, it's a weird one because she was obviously the third seed going into the US Open, defending champion. But this loss didn't particularly surprise me, to be honest. I think obviously Navarro beat her at Wimbledon. Her form coming into the US Open wasn't good, particularly, really. I think she definitely played better because at the US Open, and she had so many good memories from last year, and it's a Grand Slam, and she's a really good tennis player at the end of the day, so she can, try and figure things out. But it wasn't quite. Well, it was nowhere near what it was like last year, and it was tough, but I think unsurprising that Navarro beat her. To be honest, if anything, Navarro, she did well to make it 3 sets Gauff, and Navarro probably should have won in straights.
Yeah, I think I got that sense from that match as well. Navarro probably should have won that in straights, but Gauff did well to fight back. I think Navarro maybe got a little bit tight as well. But I would agree with you that this US Open has been better for Gauff compared to Wimbledon, the Olympics, Canada and Cincinnati, because we got to see some of that fighting spirit come back. And she didn't lose at the first challenge, which was Svitolina. because that's what was happening in the tournaments that I mentioned, is that she comes up against someone with a caliber to challenge her and she loses the match. She did fight back and beat Svitolina in that third round that they played, and that gave me a little bit of hope for her. But yeah, that's kind of maybe the positives that I can take out of that, like you've picked up on. So maybe now the pressure's off as like being a defending Grand Slam champion, and she's dropped down the rankings a bit. She can maybe sort of reset a bit and sort of tap into that fighting spirit again.
Yeah, I mean, obviously the Grand Slam season is over now for 2024, so I don't think it would be the worst idea for her to just take some time. I mean, obviously there'll be the goal of reaching the WTA Finals, but I think maybe just a bit of time to sort of reset, have that. It must have been a very intense past couple of months with the Olympics, being the flag bearer, defending all those points, defending a Grand Slam title. Obviously, a lot of attention on Coco Gauff, and now I think it'd be a good idea to sort of take a bit of time, maybe work on the things that have been she's been struggling with. Obviously, the forehand is always a bit of a factor. The serve hasn't been fantastic recently, and yeah, I think maybe play the 1,000 event, and try and qualify for the finals. But I don't think it's the be all and end all. She'll reach the finals at some point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think we've not seen the last of Coco Gauff. This is a blip.
Yeah, she's only 20 years old at the end of the day.
Yeah, absolutely. As of right now, regardless of where she gets back to, because I called her top 4 going into this, and I've been referring to the WTA top 4 for most of the year now. But maybe we can now say that with this loss, the era of a top 4 is over until Gauff recaptures that. And as of the current state, very much subject to change because people tennis changes all the time, Gauff's probably slipped back into battling to be best of the rest behind the other 3.
Yeah, I mean, you've obviously got Swiatek and Sabalenka. Then you've got Rybakina, who's kind of can be in that 3, but also, like we've mentioned, can also just not be a presence at all. But yeah, I think Gauff is probably with Pegula. I mean, Paolini has been there a lot this year, but I think just kind of in the sort of the section after those 3, and definitely has the capabilities to put herself back amongst those. But for the time being, it's not really been there. I mean, we'll mention it more later, but currently 6th in the race, and her ranking is also at number 6. So that probably does feel about right as of late. But yeah, I think it will come back at some point. It's just how long that will take.
And it's interesting because actually I think she's got there by having a very similar season to Emma Navarro, by consistently getting points and getting to sort of the midpoint or slightly further in big tournaments. She's got a few 1,000 semi-finals and a Grand Slam semi-final to her name and a title. Emma Navarro has all of those things as well. Has she won a WTA title, Emma Navarro? I'm pretty sure she has.
Yeah, I would assume so, but I'll have a quick check.
Yeah, let's double check that. Has Emma Navarro won a WTA title yet? I know she's won ITFs. Sure, I remember her winning a title. Very similar kind of points, but obviously the context defines whether it's a good season. Yes, she has. She's won a singles title.
She's won Hobart. I've just had a look.
Hobart. That's so
yeah.
She's won a 250. Gauff's won a 250. They've got to 1,000 semi-finals, Grand Slam semi-finals. Very similar kind of years. For Navarro, it's huge because this is the first time she's doing something like this and she's breaking through. For Gauff, it's subpar because we've seen her get further and even winning big tournaments, which is where kind of the context comes in. But I still think that there is some positives to take away from having that consistent season and still winning matches consistently, despite questions about how well you're actually playing. There's something to take away from that and build on for Gauff.
Yeah, I think when your level is so good and you've got so many weapons, obviously her backhand is a huge weapon. It's kind of nice for her to have that base level that still will compete and beat a lot of players in these draws. So she has been able to get to the last stages, and even I think a lot of the talk around Gauff is quite negative at the moment because of the North American hardcourt swing being so much worse than last year. But it hasn't been all that bad throughout the year. It's just not necessarily been as good as it was at the end of last year. So it's just comparing to her peak is tricky. But I think Gauff just needs to work out a few elements of her game that will eventually make the base level even higher and higher and higher, so that her base level is just beating more and more players, and her peak level will beat the best.
Speaking of, I mentioned Navarro a lot, and actually that's a question dawned on me because obviously she's lost to Navarro twice. Is it possible that she's just got a bad matchup with Navarro right now?
Yeah, it definitely is. I mean, I think they must be the only 2 times they've played. If I just give a quick check. But yeah, I mean, like I mentioned, and we kind of spoke about Navarro and I think Gauff did win their first meeting at the start of the year, but Navarro does have a bit of Pegula and Gauff about her, and that is when you're not playing so great, like Gauff hasn't been. When you're playing against a player like Navarro is so solid, it can be tricky because it's very frustrating, and the errors probably go up and up and up, and they just become more and more of a thing. And I think in that match she hit, how many errors was it in total? It was 60 enforced errors. So it's a big number, and the first serve percentage was down at 46%. So it's when you're playing like a player as solid as Navarro and with as many weapons as she has, then you're not going to fare too well.
All right, let's talk Rybakina. I don't think it has much to talk about because Rybakina played one match, won it, and then vanished. She just left the US Open. Her health continues to beleaguer her, and in my view, until she's back on, fully on, she's kind of in her own category between Iga and Arena and the rest of the tour. As of September 2024, I don't think that's going to be a fixed position. But if you look right here, right now, that seems to be the state of play to me.
Yeah, I mean, it's so hard to predict anything that Rybakina is going to do in terms of tournaments when she does play, because you just can't say if she's going to finish the tournament, if she's going to finish a match, 2 matches, 3 matches. It's just you don't know, but you know that when she is playing, she's playing well. There's very, very few players who can beat her, particularly on hard courts where she's been so strong, and obviously on grass as well, where she's won Wimbledon. And yeah, it's a really tricky one. I mean, there's a lot of talk around her at the moment and other stuff, and it's tricky when you don't know the full ins and outs, but you kind of just want her to be feeling well and feeling like the player that was winning Indian Wells, winning Wimbledon, reaching the Australian Open final, and producing these fantastic matches.
Yeah, I would love to see that back again, and I'd love to stop talking about is she healthy? What's going on with her coach? Is she retiring? Which, by the way, was a ridiculous story, and quickly disproven by the fact they announced a major sponsorship around when the rumors came out. So this is just people making 5 out of 2 and +2. Yeah, but I would love to be able to start talking about Rybakina's tennis again and not what's going on off the court, because at the end of the day, what happens on the court should be what defines things.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's kind of none of our business when it's someone's health, and people are so desperate to know what's going on. But it's at the end of the day, it's no one's business, and it's kind of the thing you have to do is just wish that she's okay and wish she's getting better and wishing that she can really just have that consistency and play tennis and enjoy playing tennis and playing the tennis that we know she can play. Like, really, Rybakina's top level could be, I would say, every single player on the tour. Maybe it would be close against the top level of Sabalenka and Swiatek, but it could beat the top level of Sabalenka and Swiatek. And those three playing matches at the biggest tournaments is what we really want to see. But at the moment, it's kind of just we want to see Rybakina playing draws and getting through the draws as far as she can go.
Well said. Can't add to that. Yeah, I think couldn't put it better myself. So I'm not going to try. Just repeat you. Yeah, as I said, wanted to make sure we mentioned Rybakina as a regular check-in when she plays or when she's in a tournament. Before we wrap up the US Open, do you have any contenders for match of the tournament on the women's side? What would you say were the ones we'd say will go down?
It's a strange one because it feels like the tournament is the start of the tournament feels like years ago, and it's really hard to like I feel like it's hard to put myself in that headspace of where I was 2 weeks ago and really think about those matches. I mean, I think kind of on a disappointing match that I think had a lot of potential was Muchova and Osaka. And I think that match really deserved a third set, and then it just got halted when maybe Osaka didn't take the chances that she had. But yeah, I'm kind of alluding. My brain is alluding the matches that. So I think you need to save me on this point. Obviously, Zheng Vekic. I didn't watch that match live, so maybe that's why I'm not thinking about it. I've watched the highlights, but yeah, I didn't watch it live, so it's kind of not as present in my mind as it is for many.
Yeah, I mean, for me, there's three choices, or three kind of the top three matches of the tournament.
Yeah.
Only one of which I've actually seen, to be honest, because I haven't had time to go back and watch highlights. But I'm going off what other people I trust are telling me. Muchova versus Osaka is Vance's pick, or was before the final, which was interesting. I was like, okay, really? It didn't go 3. Zheng versus Vekic is being mentioned in the chat, and social media went mad after that match. I woke up to so many tweets saying that was amazing. I've got to go check that out. And then the other one, I would say the final, Sabalenka Pegula. Okay, it was straight, 7-5, 7-5, but you didn't really know which way it was going to go until maybe 5-all in the second.
Yeah, and the only other one that I can think of that is kind of a bit of a dark horse. I don't know if anyone else, people might like completely think I'm sort of being ridiculous, but maybe not in terms of the quality of it, in terms of the drama. I really quite enjoyed Badosa Rusa. I thought that was a really good close match, and yeah, it was one of those matches where I couldn't tell who was going to win right until the last point. So for me, they're the best matches. But yeah.
Badosa Rusa was definitely the closest match of the tournament, because that final set tiebreak really could have gone in either direction. I did watch that, and yeah, it wasn't great quality, but the drama was through the roof.
Yeah, I think that's the thing that's swaying my mind. But I think Zheng Vekic is the one that seems to be getting the most mentioned. But unfortunately, I just didn't watch it, so it's kind of hard to say.
Right. Well, maybe I'm going to move it up on my end of match lists.
Yes.
I think I'm in the process of trying to put together a top 100 WTA matches of the year list. I don't know if I'll ever publish the full list, but or how I would publish it, or even how much I could be able to write on it. But
I'll be very impressed if you pull it off. But yeah, it's going to be tricky to narrow that down.
Yeah, I'm basically just going off what causes the most buzz on social media, to be honest.
Yeah.
And who maybe like certain people recommend stuff, how much chat here, react to stuff. So yeah, but that's for the end of the season, and we are into end of season phase. If we can get the live rankings up, or like the race, because I think the race on the WTA website is probably updated now as it is post US Open. We've mentioned a lot of the players already in it. Swiatek, Sabalenka, Rybakina, Pegula, Gauff, and Navarro are all in the top 8 positions. Pagula Paolini and Krejcikova are currently taking up, who we haven't mentioned really. We mentioned Paolini in passing. Krejcikova, not really, because she didn't make much of an impact this tournament. Second round exit, and Krejcikova qualifying because she won Wimbledon. That is our current top 8. And I'm looking at it, and my question to you, Matt, is: do you expect this lineup to change when we get to Riyadh?
Yeah, I mean, probably not. But the thing is, Danielle Collins has so much momentum, and it kind of seems to have fallen off at the wrong time. Whether that comes back, I mean, obviously she's had injury issues, so if the injury starts to become less and less of a thing, then maybe Collins will regain that form. I believe she's playing in Guadalajara this week, so maybe that could be a factor. But I think maybe the only one I can think is Zheng. Zheng is the one that seems to have really found her form in the last few months, or since the Olympics, it's been really, and Palermo it's been really high, and obviously going into the Asian swing where she'll have a lot of popularity, particularly playing in China. So yeah, I think Zheng is the one that could potentially cause an upset. It's just who is the player to fall out, and that's the one I'm finding challenging.
Yeah, because they're going to be picking up points as well. I think it's going to depend on. I think the ones who are vulnerable the most are going to be Gauff and Navarro, because Krejcikova would really have to fall off not to make it, because she has to just be in the top 20. Being Wimbledon champion and in the top 20 is going to be what she needs.
Yeah.
So, I don't see a scenario where Krejcikova loses a top 20 spot. I don't think she's got that many points to defend. So, yeah, it's really going to come down to what kind of results Gauff and Navarro get relative to Collins and Zheng, really, because those are the main threats. I am seeing Ostapenko and Sakari being mentioned. I think that's optimistic. But for me, it's got to come down to, I would agree with you. It's whether Collins can get some kind of momentum back and what Zheng can produce, because I think she will be strong in Asia. I agree with you. Yeah,
definitely. But yeah, I can't see anyone else other than that. People are saying Ostapenko, but I can't see that either. I think that if you look at the points difference, it's quite a gap. It's like 1,000 points from Navarro. So Ostapenko would have to have a phenomenal last few months of the season.
She needs to win one of the thousands, really.
Yeah. Which she's capable of doing, but whether she will, I think the form has been a bit off in the last couple of months.
Yeah. I agree with you. I think for me, I think for both of us, it's going to be, can Collins and Zheng chase down Gauff and Navarro? And the other, I think it's only a matter of time before Rybakina, Paolini, and Pegula qualify. That's assuming Rybakina is healthy enough to play, of course, because then that opens up an extra spot.
Yeah. I mean, that could obviously open up a spot for Collins or Zheng, and then, or maybe even if Collins or Zheng overtook Gauff and Navarro, then one of them could still get in if there's an extra spot available. But it's kind of too many if buts and maybes, and Rybakina could be completely ready to go and could, like we said, could win the whole thing. We just don't know.
Imagine after the season Rybakina's had, where so stop-start, plays every other tournament due to being ill, and ends up winning the WTA Finals. That would be insane. Well, it would also be on track. It'd be very WTA.
Well, yeah, and also it's just the fact that everyone's talking about how little tournaments Rybakina's played, how stop-start it's been, and yet she's still third in the race. It does show that when she is playing, it's the form and the game is just always there, pretty much.
Yeah, it's going to be fascinating to watch and see how it all unfolds. We'll do updates on the lineup in every show going forward. So basically, how much closer, how much further away certain people are getting, how solid this lineup is, and whether it's going to, and it'll be interesting to see whether it stays that way. And that will include next week when we wrap up Guadalajara and Monastir. Won't go too much of into a preview, because obviously we were all here to kind of go into the big stories and the big questions after the US Open. But we've got a WTA 500 coming up in Guadalajara. Top 4 seeds there: Danielle Collins, Jelena Ostapenko, Victoria Azarenka, and Caroline Garcia. Only other big name in the draw is Sloane Stephens. And Monastir is a 250, obviously a favourite of the show from last year, where Elise Mertens is the top seed and the only top 50 player taking part, the second seed being Diane Parry. So, yeah, thought, I guess, maybe we probably won't spend too much time on Monastir, but is there anything that you'll be looking at from Guadalajara as a story?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, Danielle Collins, like I mentioned, it'll be interesting to see how she is after a disappointing US Open result. In terms of, obviously, form injury, it'll be interesting to see if she can pick up the form we saw earlier in the year and get herself some points heading into the race and trying to get one of those top 8 spots. But yeah, I think it'll be interesting. Obviously, it hasn't been a very good year for Caroline Garcia. I think the interesting thing about Guadalajara as well is that it's now a 500, and last year it was an 1,000 event where Sakkari won. So Maria Sakkari is set to lose a lot of points this week and isn't even playing. So I think her top 10 exit is pretty much guaranteed. So that's kind of the thing that's standing out in my head right now.
Yeah, actually, thinking of that, Caroline Dolheid's defending final points from Guadalajara.
Yes.
She is playing the 500 event. I didn't include her on the list, but actually, see, if she won the tournament, she wouldn't defend all of the points, but it would be close enough if she did it. Yeah, there you go. That's what we're going to look forward to this week. Obviously, hopefully you are in a time zone that can make the most of one of these two events. Matt, thank you so much for coming on, and that was an epic WTA Weekly debut.
Cheers, it's been good to have me on. I mean, it's a nice one to start with, and there's a lot to suck your teeth into and chat about.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to doing that again. So please come back. And please come back, our wonderful viewers in the chat. I know you've putting a lot of points in there. We didn't get to all of them, but hopefully we did cover some of the things that you raised, and we came back to you on some of that. Thank you, wonderful listeners, if you are listening back on the podcast version of this. So yeah, back with WTA Weekly next week to wrap up all things Guadalajara and Monastir, and then we'll kick off the Asian swing, starting with the Korea Open, the Seoul 500. So I'm looking forward to that. I'll see you then. But until then, take care and keep talking tennis.
If you enjoyed this video, make sure you hit that like button. Don't forget to subscribe and click that notification bell so you don't miss out on all things